Okay, hello folks. Welcome to another episode of the Coaches Club podcast, brought to you by halftimecupper.com. My name is Rob Amanze, and I'm pleased to bring to you another great episode featuring a guest, which is Saj Sri.
Oh, you didn't go for the whole surname then?
No, I'm not going to pronounce that. Sorry, mate. Maybe when we do the thumbnail for the podcast, put the full name in, but I'm supposed to Saj Sri for now. Is that all right?
Saj Sri is perfect. Yeah, everyone knows me as Saj anyway. So it's
brilliant. So before we begin, you can catch up on all of our previous episodes on iTunes or on Spotify or on our website, which is halftimecupper.com. Right, so this is it. I mean, I mentioned you, Saj, when I did my coach's journey with Danny, I think it was last month, as you're pretty much my mentor and helped me get into the world of football coaching. So I'm really pleased that you've taken the time out to work with us and do your coaching journey today.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. And yeah, I've had a listen to a few of the episodes, and I think it's some great content and some very kind words you said about me. Very appreciative. So no, I'm more than
excellent. And how moment during this, I don't like using the word lockdowns. I use the word stay-at-home period. How have you been, like, keeping yourself busy? Have you been okay, or was it quite relaxing for you? What have you been up to?
Yeah, well, I've been one of the quite fortunate ones who's been able to continue to work. So I've just been working from home. The company I work for is in the healthcare industry anyway, so we've seen a lot of business during this period. So it's been quite busy for us.
Okay.
So yeah, fortunately, I've had a lot of things to do as well as enjoy some time off and enjoy some of the weather when it was good.
That 1 week.
Yeah, just coping, getting on with it.
Yeah, which we need to do, which is brilliant. And I guess looking forward to returning to the Premier League, which I don't know what time's out this podcast, but it starts tonight basically in our world, doesn't it?
Yeah, basically. I'm really excited. Can't wait. Obviously, I've been spending a lot of hours in the last few days on my fantasy football team. Got to make sure we hit the ground running again. Yeah, there's a few leagues I'm trying to win. So yeah.
So that's the main reason why you're pushing for the restart. It wasn't to see Liverpool win the leagues. I know you're a Liverpool fan. It was make sure you win your fantasy football league.
Exactly. On one of our leagues, there's about £140.
Oh, really? Wow, that's serious business.
Second place is like 3 points behind me. So yeah, it's serious.
Brilliant. Okay, so I mean, this is going to be the Coaches Podcast, and you are probably one of the best football coaches I had a chance to work with. So can you please tell the people listening, how you made the decision to become a youth football coach?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was never actually my decision, if I'm being honest. So I was 16 at the time, and I was playing cricket actually for this like community cricket academy called Cannons Cricket Academy, based out of my school at the time. And the guy who ran that he gave me the opportunity to do my level 1 in coaching cricket, but he also knew I was a big football fan, and his name's Ben Rawlings, huge character in my coaching career, and someone who really gave me all the tools to go forward and the confidence. And he was working for Barnet Football Club at the same time as well, and he offered me an opportunity to do my level 1 in football. And for free, and the only return would be just to do some hours supporting Barnet's Centre of Excellence at the time. And I obviously jumped at that. Being a 16-year-old, I always loved football, was always very passionate about it, but never one to really be a leader, if I'm being honest. I listened to Danny's episode earlier, and from what it sounded like, Danny obviously, I mean, I know he had a situation where he was kind of forced to, but he had an opportunity to go and lead and really push as a young person. Whereas for me, I was kind of told by Ben. He almost told me, he was like, Saj, I think this would be good for you. Do you want to do it? And I was never the leadership kind of person, but I thought, why not? I do love football. Let's give it a go. And literally, I did that course, and it was brilliant. From there, I spent about 8 months with Barnet. I was only supposed to do 3 because that was the agreement we had. They'll sponsor me for the level 1, and then I'd go on and support them. But I loved it so much. I was having a great time, And at Barnet, I was shadowing a coach called Maz Awadel Karim. And I was about 16, 17 at the time, and he was about 22, 23. And he was literally like my first experience of a coach who I'd met that I wanted to be exactly like. And I don't know if you've been through similar, but like everything about him, he wasn't much older than me, but he was at such a high level. So at the time, he was just finishing his master's in sports science at Loughborough University. And he was also a coach of, I think, their third team for the men's university team. And he was head of the foundation phase at Barnet. All this, and a UEFA B coach, all this at like 23, bags of experience under his belt. And yeah, I was completely in awe, and I was really fortunate to be able to learn from someone like Maz. And unfortunately, that was my only experience coaching with him. But I'm still in touch with him. But what I learned from Maz was he was a very quiet person, which is quite interesting, as obviously quite a senior coach as well. He wasn't one to scream and shout, but everyone listened to every word he said. He kind of commanded that without having to force it. And
Right.
I also got to shadow I think it was Paul Fairclough. He was manager at the time at
Oh
Barnet.
wow.
Yeah, and he was very hands-on. Like, I mean, he was manager, right? But you'd see him at every youth game. He'd be, so before every game, for the Centre of Excellence, myself and Maz, we'd be in and out of changing rooms, sort of laying the bibs out, laying the kits out, and Paul would be doing the same. He was so hands-on, top to bottom of that club, and I wasn't there for very long, but he really gave me a great example of someone who's at the top, but has a hand in every single part of the football club, and it was great to see that. And Maz taught me a lot about intensity. That's really where I got to see coaching from a first-hand point of view. And similar to what you said about shadowing me for your first season at Kinja, all I did was watch sessions. I took a couple warm-ups here and there. I refereed sometimes when he needed me for games, but during the sessions, I'd take warm-ups and I'd literally just watch and learn. And it was so interesting because he'd hardly talk at all. The session was just constant. It was high intensity, and there was very few breaks. But when there were breaks, they were needed, and he would give few words, but great words of wisdom, and the players really reacted that. And for me, that was a huge thing as a coach, because you're not told about those things on your level one. You're not told about how to get a team's attention. You're not told about how to command respect. But until you see it, it's really difficult to understand how to do that. But Maz was a great example for me in that. And one thing he always taught me, and I always saw, and he had the luxury of doing because he had so many footballs, was he'd have about 7 or 6 footballs at his side everywhere he went during a practice, especially a small-sided game, because as soon as a ball went out, he'd just smash a ball back in, test the player's first touch, and go live. And I loved it. Yeah, it was tough because these kids were about 12 or 13. But what I realized from that was, and obviously asked him, was it was about keeping that intensity. Whether the ball's gone out, it doesn't really matter in terms of a practice, whether it's going to be a throw-in or a corner. But what he did was just kept the intensity there and kept their minds engaged and kept the ball flowing. And that's something I really took on board at my time there.
Fantastic. To us, if you listen to you there and explain that, it seems if you had a very unique kind of opening to coaching, because not many people would, I guess, work at a centre of excellence with a professional football club and have into dealings with a UEFA B coach and with a professional football manager. So there's a lot there to kind of take in. That's really unique and I think quite special. So that's amazing to hear.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I jumped at the chance. I mean, I was never a confident kind of person. I was never very talkative. I was never one to lead a group. And even those 6 or 7 months I did with Barnet, it's not like I took on and grew exponentially in confidence. To be honest, I was still the same person at the end of that period. However, it's those small things that I mentioned that, to be honest, I didn't really notice till later that I picked up, and that really, really meant a lot to me, especially my formative years as a coach. And yeah, it was a great experience. And like I said, I was very fortunate. If it weren't for Ben giving me that opportunity, I probably wouldn't be doing this podcast today. I probably wouldn't even have thought of being or thought of going down a route of coaching football.
Fantastic. So, I mean, from those early days, from going from cricket to football, was anything like transferable? Was anything you noticed when you were doing the cricket coaching that you thought, hold on, I've applied this a little bit now to the football part of it, or for you, is it completely different?
Well, actually, funny enough, I did just because of timings. That's how the schedule was laid by the Cricket Association and the Football Association. I did the coaching course before the cricket coaching course. So I did
right.
I did the football coaching course in like December, and then I did the cricket coaching course in like April. And in that time, I had started coaching football with Barnet. So I actually was exposed to football coaching before cricket, even though cricket was supposed to be the one I did first. And well, that says everything, because I never stepped foot on a cricket coaching course again.
Oh, and I guess cricket's lost is football's game then, right?
Yeah, exactly. Great twist on it.
Okay. I mean, you mentioned Ben and is it Maz? You said two people kind of were your early role models or mentors getting into football. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, from your perspective, I mean, you mentioned a little bit about what you learned from them and what they did for you. Was anybody else before you got into coaching that you kind of admired from afar? Maybe someone in the professional world, or someone maybe you watch on YouTube or something like that? Was anybody else other than those two who you were maybe inspired by when you at your early ages becoming into coaching?
No, I'll be honest. No. The only reason I knew Ben, so Ben was also working at my school, Cannons High School, as an assistant PE teacher, I think, and he was obviously doing the cricket stuff, and he was at Barnet. So he just became a good friend and a great mentor. He was never one to. Ben's a great guy. He's very laid back, massive Brighton and Hove Albion fan. But I don't think he was doing much actual coaching himself at the time. He was always doing other sort of things within sports. So Ben, I never got to see Ben coach, and to this day, I don't think I've really seen Ben coach. But in terms of football, I mean, I just came in with an open mind. Different to you, I never played grassroots football. I never played football in an organised fashion. I never had a coach till I was in like year 11. So there was really no influences for me from a coaching perspective in like the grassroots level or the youth level. So I literally went in with an empty board, just ready to learn and ready to soak up everything. And to be honest, I think that steadied me in good stance, because I think that was the strength. I didn't go in with any preconceptions. I was just ready to learn and hungry to learn.
Fantastic. Okay, that's good to know. So you do your 8 months just ended to that point with Barnet, and then you enjoy it, as you mentioned. So what happens next from that point onwards? What do you then go to another club straight away? Or do you take some time out? What happens next?
Well, I was just going into my last year, so I was just going into like that was like the middle of year 11, I think. So my mum was like, all right, you need to focus on your studies, and obviously I was going to school every day, and then twice a week in the evenings I'd be at Barnet, and then once a weekend or twice a weekend I'd be at Barnet. I was only supposed to be there once a week, but any opportunity I got, I tried to get there, and it's not like I'd go there and deliver sessions. I'd literally just go stand there and like introduce myself to coaches and just stand there. I wasn't a very talkative guy. I wasn't very good at networking at all. If I think about it now, looking back, to be honest, a better person would have just gone there and got a network and found ways. But to be honest, I wasn't that kind of guy. I just wanted to see it, and that's all I did. But I had to focus on my studies, so I really didn't think about coaching again till sixth form, which is when I got a leaflet through my door about a football club that had just opened up near me called Kinja, which I'm sure has been mentioned a few times on this podcast.
Yeah, it's a theme.
And so Kinja, literally, I saw the leaflet and I thought, oh, I haven't coached for a while now. I haven't really cut my teeth anywhere. And it was actually my mum who was like, why don't you just call them up and see where they're based? So that's literally what I did. I spoke to a guy called Uliano Muzzioli, or Yul. Yul invited me for an interview. They were at the Hive, but they had just moved to the Arc Academy in Wembley, which still wasn't far from me. So I literally interviewed with him. He told me his plans for the club. The club was literally about 4 or 5 months old at that point. But he had this huge vision, and Yul, he's great at painting pictures, and he always had ambition, and that's something I had too. So being able to, and if I'm being honest, at that time, for me, it was just like, well, there's not many coaches at this club. They don't have many teams. In fact, they had 1.5 teams at that point. And I thought, well, I can cut my teeth here. I can really get some experience from the ground up. So I never really thought about it, Kinja becoming what it is now. It was more of just giving me an opportunity to go in there without having to assist for too long. I was really hungry to deliver and put into practice that level 1 and step up and do my level 2, which is what we talked about in that interview. And you all gave me the chance to do.
Oh, so was it quite quickly at that point onwards where you joined the club and were working as a volunteer there that you then did your level 2 straight away? Or did you do like a season with the club and then work your way towards it? What did you do?
Yeah, so it was within that first year, really, because I joined in like September, I think 2011. And it was I was shadowing him and his girls team, because that's all he had. He had a girls team and a boys team. He'd take the girls on a Sunday, he'd take the boys on a Sunday, he'd take the girls on a Saturday. So I was assisting the sessions with the girls and the boys. And then eventually, as you've probably heard from Mo's story, Mo joined, then Corey joined, then Prane joined, then you joined, and we started to get coaches, we started to get more players, more teams. But yeah, I was able to do my level 2 within that first year. That was sort of the agreement we had. I told you all that I'm happy to volunteer and help you build this club, but I'd like to be given something in return, and he was more than happy to do that. So I think within that first year I did my level 2.
Fantastic. Okay, that's really good, because it seems as if from a very early point you kind of were given some sort of pathway from your, as this is what we can do for you, and then in return you work within the club. So can you remember going back now? I mean, what were the first couple of years like, or first couple of seasons like at Kinja? Because I know you mentioned that you were there at a time when it was, I mean, club now has got multiple, over 10 different teams, boys and girls, and senior teams. So what was it like for you as a coach in those very early days? We mentioned it was like 1 and particularly a half team there. What was your role?
It was fun. It was fun. That's the best way to put it. Because at the beginning, the core really was myself, Yul, Corey, Mo, and Leonie, who was a parent but would help as a secretary almost. But yeah, it was fun because we all had this vision. You all had this massive vision for the club, that was basically to have a team for every age group and every gender, which was very ambitious, but it was something we were all on board with, and he had a plan to get there. And he gave us complete freedom. So I mean, once I got given a team, my first team was a group of girls that they were under 14s at the time, and 90% of them were from the American school in London. And that was very interesting because I was assisting that team for the first season, and then I took over in their second season, and I took over the under 12 boys with yourself. And it was great. Those first, I mean, my whole time at Kinja was very much my formative years as a coach, and this is where I really got to cut my teeth. I really got to deliver my level 1 and my level 2 sessions, put that into practice, create my own sessions, share and learn with other coaches who had similar philosophies and great ideas, and were so different from each other. I mean, all those coaches I mentioned, we all work very differently. Mo is very technical and very much about the player, the individual. Yul was very tactical, and very much about systems and styles of play. And Corey was also very tactical, more of a laid back coach, but had his own way of doing things. And it was just great to work with other coaches who were who were young in the game and hungry, and we were all working towards the same goal. It was a great atmosphere.
Yeah, I think that's the key point. You literally just said it now, finishing that sentence. I joined after a lot of the coaches you just mentioned were at the club. And
Yeah,
the atmosphere,
yeah,
and the atmosphere was fantastic because, like you said, everyone was hungry and driven,
Nice.
and there's what to share ideas as well. It wasn't anyone was there's no monopoly on a good idea. Everyone was really giving you advice and telling you, okay, this is
No,
what I would
exactly.
do and that will do. And at the same point, people give you praise. I really like what we did there, and what would you do that again? So yeah, I can imagine someone like you, and certainly for me, but I can imagine someone for you, quite young, had a bit of experience coming to that environment. It kind of opens your eyes a little bit more, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that's the thing, right? We were all encouraged to learn from each other. I mean, there were times, I don't know if you were here, but like we'd go to, so the local pub was the Torch. We'd go to the Torch and we'd all come up with one of our session plans that we've delivered, and then as a group we discuss them and talk about how they could be potentially improved, potentially tweaked, what else could be done. And it was just great. It was a great way to learn. It was great to know that there's other coaches at the club who had your back, and you were all working together, and every player knew every coach. So it wasn't like Corey's team didn't know me or my team didn't know Mo. Like everyone would say hi to the coach and introduce themselves regardless of what team they're on, and it was a great community atmosphere. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, really, really good. It brings back some memories for me hearing you talk about that, which is great. Um,
Yeah.
would you say there were any particular difficulties for you at that time? You still mentioned you in your formative years as a coach. Do you think you thought this is difficult or is this a bit of a challenge for me as I'm making my way through?
You know what? To be honest, during my time at Kinja, obviously you joined and you were a great help in assisting with that boys team, and you were also someone. You were my first assistant, so you were someone I could bounce ideas off, and I never had that before. I was usually being the one where ideas were being bounced off, and for my teams, I never really had someone who I could get an opinion off. But it was great to have you because when I did have those times where I was a bit stuck during a game, or if I just didn't think of something, I'd have someone like you as a second set of eyes. So that was definitely useful and helpful having you present. And even from a coaching perspective, like at that level, and I'm sure any grassroots coach listening can relate, you're lucky to get half a third of an 11 aside. Sometimes we'd be training on a third of a third. So
Yes, yes.
yeah.
100% agree
So when,
with that.
so when you've got like 20 players and you're on like half a third, it can be a nightmare. But having coaches like yourself, like Mo, like Corey, who I can like kind of pull aside and be like, look, mate, I need to. This is my plan for the session. Do you mind if I take a bit more space, or do you mind if I take this much of your space? And because there were no egos, because we were all friends, because we were all there to learn and had similar philosophies, there was never those kind of clashes. So I've never had an issue with another coach at Kinja. I've never had an issue of not having enough equipment or not being able to borrow something. So the culture at the club was really conducive to solving problems, and I think that's credit to Yul and the way he recruited and set that up. But yeah, to be honest, I didn't really have issues, and if I did, I knew I could learn from them. There was never a sort of I never felt under pressure at Kinja. I never felt like um, I was going to be crucified for something I did wrong. I always felt like it was like my home. Honestly, I could do things, make mistakes, and learn from them. And I think that's really important. If you're a coach at a young age, looking to learn, looking to develop, if you can find a club where you're allowed to do that and you're given that freedom, it can really set you up for the rest of your coaching career and where you go from there.
Yeah, yeah. Wise words. I think particularly when you mention, I mean, it's lovely to hear someone call a place or you're volunteering to work as home. I think that makes a big imprint on someone's life. But also the fact that you mentioned there about being able to make mistakes. I think as human beings, particularly when you're all in the press and you're in something and you're quite passionate about it, you're almost scared to make a mistake because you think, oh no, everyone's going to look down
Mm.
on me or I'm going to be reprimanded for that. But if you're at a place where people understand that, yeah, of course you're going to make mistakes, you're a coach who's developing. And development comes from learning from those mistakes, and that's really important. So it's pleasing to hear that you were given an opportunity at a young age to kind of do that within that environment.
So I've just you've just jogged my memory. There was one thing I found particularly hard, and it was
Okay.
never on the pitch. So for my first season with the U14 girls, you all used to do this match report. and I'm sure you've done a fair few in your time. So after a game, you do a match report, you send it out to the players of the team and their parents, just like summing up the game and how it went, who scored, highlights, blah blah blah. So I started doing that, and I've never been very good at writing, and I'm never very good at like academic stuff, or even sending emails. The anxiety I would face when I had to send an email to a group of parents was ridiculous. But yeah, that was probably the hardest thing, because I'd get emails back after a report like, oh, why wasn't my daughter mentioned? Oh, why wasn't
okay.
report? And I'd be like, oh, come on, man. Like, she got mentioned last week. I can't mention her every week. But those are the hard.
Okay, but how did you deal with that? I mean, was it a case of, like you said, you kind of, not jovial, but you kind of gave a kind of warm response back as, oh yeah, we met her last week and she did really, really well, but I'll prefer to this particular girl this week? Or did you have to kind of be a bit more strict with that and say, no, it's about the team? Like, was that difficult for you then, doing that?
I found it annoying, not difficult, because
right.
If I'm being honest, you know me, I've never been one to give out medals for participation. So if you haven't done anything of specific note during the game, I can't really mention you. But I obviously didn't go say that to the parents. That's what I said to Yul, and Yul just took me off the match reports. So that was the solution, I guess.
But the diplomacy there from Yul.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Right, so I'm going to kind of move forward a little bit now. So you start at Kinja. You said you were assisting Yul for that first year. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it was, for that first year. I mean, half of the year I was assisting, and then half he gave me a team to prepare for the next year, basically.
Okay, and that was, so you mentioned that was one of them was a girls' team, one of the boys' team. So talk to me about those two teams. I mean, what were your experience working with, I guess, two different genders, two different age groups? These are the first two teams you've actually coached at a sense of a full season then, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so these are my first two teams ever, like, that I've had responsibility over. So it was really interesting. So the girls were, for the first few weeks, a nightmare. So and a complete nightmare. And I'll tell that to their faces. They know that. We've got a really good relationship now. But so they obviously saw me as an assistant. So when I took over, it was really difficult. And maybe you've experienced similar as well. Coming from that number 2 role to a number 1 role, especially with kids, they kind of see you as like the fun coach, the coach who you can kind of mess around with and kind of and not be as serious with, which is tough. It's really tough, and it's hard to move that into a more balanced position. And I did struggle, and I remember those first couple of weeks. That's another thing. When you get a whole team of players and you don't know their names, it's so difficult to command respect, because you can't just say, "Oh, you." Like,
yeah. But by the way, as coaches, I'm speaking that for both of us, that's a gift that we have to enable quite quickly. It's the memory of people's names, isn't it? It's so important to make sure that the person you're talking to, you know who they are. Otherwise, you basically you bluff it, but not for long. You got to really make sure you remember their names.
No, 100%. And in that first month of having those teams, I learned 2 things very, very quickly. And that was, one, I need to learn everyone's names. So I used to just go through we used to get their little ID cards for the league.
Yeah.
I used to go through those at home and like test myself on their names and stuff. And I always found
I love that attention to detail.
I just wanted to stop it being awkward during sessions, right? So I've always found it easier to remember names when I know their surnames for some reason as well. So that helped. But I also learned very quickly I needed to get a good watch with a stopwatch and a timer, because, as you know me, I like to be organized. So when it came to sessions, I already knew when I'd planned my breaks and my water breaks and drinks breaks. So getting a watch and learning those names, I had to do really quickly.
Great tips.
Yeah. So with the boys team, it was completely different. So most of them didn't know each other, and most of them were new to the club. So it was almost complete opposite to the girls. The girls all knew each other. They were all friends at school. They were all very good at football. and they had been at the club and known a lot of people at the club through the ASL community. Whereas the boys, a lot of them were local boys, local lads from local schools. Some knew each other, some didn't. Obviously younger, but and mixed ability. And that team is where I really got to leave my stamp, because obviously they were younger as well, so they were very early in their stage of learning. Some of them were 10, most were 11. And that's where I really got to put my stamp on them, as a team. And yeah, they were completely different experiences. But looking back, it was excellent for me from a learning point of view, because on a Tuesday I'd go coach the boys with absolute autonomy and like knowing exactly what session I'm going to do, delivering it well, and most of the time. And then on a Wednesday, I'd go coach the girls, and it'd just be absolute chaos. They wouldn't listen to a word I'm saying. They'd be doing their own thing. The session wouldn't be challenging enough. So it was great. It was great because I had a mix of success and failure, and I learned how to cope with both.
Excellent. Can I ask, touching quickly on the point that you mentioned about a brand new fresh team with the boys side of things, what do you do to help them gel? I'm just curious. I mean, I know the answer, but I kind of want to help out anyone listening here who is in that situation. Was there any kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Were there any kind of thoughts or ideas you had at that time to kind of get this group of people who had never really played football together to become more of a unit? Because they definitely became that unit and a great team eventually. But what was sort of all of that? Can you remember?
Yeah. I mean, that's one of my favorite things as a coach, actually. Obviously, I love watching a player develop, and getting a win is always great. But I love, and I absolutely have a great passion for watching a team develop. I love seeing leaders come out of holes. I love seeing personalities develop, and watching boys who maybe, or girls who didn't get on, become friends or become respectful of each other. I really do enjoy that team aspect. And I love creating that. And in order to create that, I just let them have fun. I mean, that's obviously not letting them just run around, do whatever they want. It's giving them. So I more often than not, I try and play competitive games. So you know me, I always love to put a competitive edge on a session.
Yeah.
And if it's a team building session, I kind of want to make it them against me. So if you're not going to like each other, you can all hate me, and then you'll like each other through that. So I try and get.
Okay, that's not
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because with a lot of players, they want to be mates with each other. I mean, it's not like, especially at that age, you don't really have reason to not like another kid. It's just you're shy. They don't know each other. They haven't really been properly introduced. So you kind of give them a scenario where they've kind of got to do that themselves. And there's loads of games I used to play to try and do that. One of my favorites, and I think you know this one, is I don't know what the name for it is. I call it piggy in the middle, but someone has to be the piggy. So a player will put on a bib and stand in the middle of a very, very small, tight square, maybe 10 by 10. And then the rest of the players have a ball between them, and they've got to basically hit the piggy below the waist. And if you hit the piggy, you become the piggy. But if the ball goes out of that very tiny square, then all the boys, apart from the piggy, have to sprint around that square twice. So
Okay.
yeah, more often than not, what will happen is they'll just keep kicking the ball out, or they'll keep missing, and they'll just keep having to do sprints around the square, and they'll start to get annoyed with me because they're like, "Why do we have to sprint around the square?" And I'm like, "Well, it's usually they'll kind of start to a personality will pop up and start to try and dictate, and then you get them discussing, talk about how they can problem solve, and it's just getting them confident, really, giving them the opportunity to use their own skills and communicate with each other and problem solve. I think that's the best way to get a team going.
Get them at a risk, and then give them a way to work out how to avoid that risk, and they'll shoot bond together. I think that's a good one.
Yeah, exactly, because they're all in the same boat, right? And they want to get the same result. So, yeah.
Excellent. Right. So, I mean, we covered quite a lot so far in regards to you're in as a Barnet and now you're in as a Kinja. What happens next then? 'Cause I know this point onwards you work with the same age groups for a couple of seasons, and then you make your way to the American School in London. So do you want to maybe talk about that period of time of your couple of seasons with the girls teams, with the boys teams, and your way to ASL as a coach?
Yeah, so in my third season at Kinja, I think I was in my second year of uni. Yeah, I was just about to finish uni. sorry, in my second year of uni, when 2012, I got offered an interview for a position to coach at the American School in London. Obviously, I had known a lot of the players, but I had no idea about the school, the coaches there, the system at all. I had heard things from Yule, who was already working there as their coach for their third team for the boys' side, and he always spoke really highly of the place. So I interviewed with their head coach of the boys' side at the time. His name's Akai Mustafa. Again, this was another big person in my coaching career and personal life. He's a great friend and a great mentor, still is. And this is where I first bumped into him. So I did a practice session. So it was an interview, but he wanted me to deliver a session to his boys, and he was head of the first team at the time. So ASL were training at the Hive during the off season. They had all three teams there. So I delivered a training session. I got to speak with Akai. He liked it. He liked my session. He liked me. He offered me the role at ASL, and I ended up joining as the girls' assistant coach for their second team, which was great. Again, the coach I was assisting was her name was Becca. She was very headstrong. She knew her football. Played in her time as well. I think she played college soccer in the States. But she wasn't one to delegate. She very much was always in control, always done things her way. So to be honest, I didn't have much of an influence at that point. But it was really the year after and the remaining years at ASL when I went to the boys' side and became the head coach for the second team. That's really where I started to kick on as a coach, and I started to learn a whole different side of things. So Kinja really taught me about the foundation phase and how I needed to be as a coach at that level. But at ASL was a completely different level. I mean, it was pretty much like an academy. And I went in during the golden generation, which I didn't know at the time, but I now know looking back. But the level of players was incredible. So generally, it's high school. So the equivalent of UK high school to their high school is basically, so they were ninth grade to 12th grade, which is basically year 10 to year 13.
Okay.
Sorry, eighth grade to 12th grade, which is basically year 9 to year 13. So it was 14-year-olds to 18-year-olds. And the first team was generally made up of the 18-year-olds and the best of the rest. And the second team and the first team would be developmental. Sorry, the second team and the third team would be developmental. So my job as that second team head coach, and Akai made this very clear to me at the start, was we sat down and we wrote down goals. I actually went to visit him at his office in ASL because he was also working full time as in the athletics office. And I remember I sat down with him just before pre-season, and I just wanted to know everything because he's one to teach. He loves teaching. He loves someone who asks questions, and I can ask questions for days. So literally, we just sat there, went through the plans for pre-season, what he wanted me to do as a coach, and what my targets were with my team for that season. And it really gave me a great structure that I could focus on and think about when I'm delivering sessions, when I'm speaking with players. I always had these big goals in the back of my head and these targets that I knew myself and the team were working towards.
Okay. So you really felt at this point in time now that you were developing as a coach because you have another, I guess, set of eyes watching you and working with you. And also you were working with an instructor now where there were goals. I'm not saying there weren't goals and plans at Kinja, but you actually having meetings where you had pre-season targets and the season targets, etc. At this point,
I mean the biggest. Oh, go on. Sorry.
No. Please go on. Add.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight the difference between, or for me personally, was at Kinja. Obviously, there were coaches who were on the similar level to myself, who were learning, cutting their teeth. But at ASL, I was very, very lucky because at that time, they just had a whole host of great coaches. So there were 3 coaches on the girls' side and 4 coaches on the boys' side. So the 3 coaches out of the 3 on the girls' side, one was Colin Grafton, ex Edgware and QPR goalkeeper in the 60s and 70s, who went on to coach for QPR and High Wycombe and a few other teams. He had a wealth of experience, great coach. He was primarily a goalkeeping coach, but obviously with someone with that experience, you've got to just learn. And they also had a gentleman called Greg. Greg was head of the girls' side. He had played college soccer in America. I think Division 1 or Division 2. So he played at a very high level in the US. And he was a great coach. Had coached at college level as well. Then there was Becca. And then on the boys' side, you had Akai, who was at Norwich at the time. I think with the Centre of Excellence coach. And he was head coach for the boys at ASL. And his assistant, which was funny enough, was Jay Marshall, who was actually his boss at the time at Norwich. So Jay was like, I think, regional scout at the time at Norwich. He had just come from Luton. And Jay's got a wealth of experience. Great in terms of player ID. And he could see things in a minute of football that I would struggle to see in 10 minutes. Like he had a great eye. And I was just lucky. And there was another coach called Carlos, Salvador Zhao, excellent coach, still a good friend of mine. Great player. To this day, I've played with some good players, and this guy is on some different level. Unfortunately, his career was cut short due to injury, but he's played all over the world. He was in one of the World Cup adverts as well. But I was just lucky. I was very lucky at ASL I was very lucky to be surrounded by some amazing coaches with ridiculous amount of experience, and I literally just got to learn and question them all throughout. So I was very fortunate in that sense.
Okay, you literally just preempted my next question. Was going to ask you what the main differences were from working at ASL to Kindred, but I think you explained that now, and it's the level of coaching and the detail that was there as well, which is brilliant. So thank you for going into detail about that. So what happens next then? So you're still coaching at Kindred this time. You're coaching at ASL. What's happening with you? Because at some point you get the courage to go forward for UEFA B. So is this a period of time in your career when you're at ASL starting off and you're at Kindred, or was it a little bit further down the line? What happens next, basically?
Yeah, this is basically when I really wanted to kick on. So I was just about to graduate from uni. This was like middle of 2013. I was just about to graduate. Sorry, middle of 2014. I just finished. Was about to graduate. Akai was moving to Singapore. So he was leaving his post at ASL as obviously head coach, but also as his full-time role in the athletics office. So I interviewed for that full-time role in the athletics office. I was successful. And I spoke with Yul, and obviously I told him how we progressed. I'd done my level 2. I think it had been like 2 years since I did my level 2. I was coaching 11 aside at a good level with ASL. So we came to an agreement. He sponsored me for half of the UEFA B, which was amazing for me. And it was a big step, and I was really nervous because, I mean, when you're in the coaching world and you speak to people about level 1, level 2, obviously you learn a few things. But I hadn't heard much about the UEFA B. I didn't know that many coaches at that level. So I remember very clearly on the way back from one of the games, we played in like Surrey somewhere, and it was like 9:30 p.m. I was really late, loads of traffic. I was coming back with the boys team, and it was myself, Akai, and Jay on the coach. I think Carlos was sleeping as usual. And I asked them about the UEFA B because Akai and Jay had both done it like 4 or 5 years prior to that. And they both spoke really highly of it. They mentioned it was a very high level. It was 11-a-side coaching, so it's not about the technical practices. It's not about these small practices. It's about the whole pitch. It's about phases of play. It's about literally the detail was just completely different, and it was great to get that insight. But I also remember clearly on that coach ride, Jay telling me I wouldn't pass the first time. He said, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something along the lines of, you're not going to pass the first time, but you will the second. You just got to do it and learn. So I said, okay. Obviously that stuck with me, and in my head I was like, well, I'm going to make sure I pass first time now you've said that. But it's not the sort of coaching courses aren't the sort of thing that you need to pass first time anyway. I mean, whether you fail 100 times, it doesn't matter as long as you're learning. But that just stuck with me because no one had ever said that to me before coaching course before that I was about to fail. And we got along. It's not like he hated me. We were good friends.
No, I guess it's just give you honest feedback, right?
Yeah, he was being dead honest because that's the experience he had. He struggled to pass the first couple of times. I think he ended up doing it with a Welsh FA, but he didn't pass the first time, and he had to wait a couple of years. That's why he went to the Welsh FA. But yeah, he was just being as honest as possible, and it was great to get that insight. But I finally got the feedback from the FA, got onto the course in about I think it was March 2015. A few months after I graduated, and it was really exciting. It was really exciting times, and I was fortunate because I was going to start that job at a full-time job straight out of uni at ASL, which not a lot of people on a sports degree can do or get to do. So I was very fortunate in that sense, and to get onto the UEFA B and to be accepted onto the course, especially because before you go on the course, they do tell you need to be coaching an 11-a-side team at a good level to be able to deliver the practices and to be able to obviously try them out in your own time and stuff. So I knew a lot of the coaches who were on the course were academy coaches, and this is something Akai told me. He told me to watch out for. He said everyone's going to show up in a club tracksuit,
right?
Make themselves look better than they are.
Yeah.
And he was exactly right. On the first day, I think me and maybe 5 others out of about 45 people weren't wearing a football club tracksuit. But yeah, it was something I was really looking forward to and excited about doing.
And were there any particular memories you have of doing the course and going on it that you got to kind of feed back to us? Any particular joys or positives you have from it, or any particular difficulties?
It was very, very challenging. And from the first day to the last, I'll be honest, I felt completely out of my depth just because I thought I didn't belong there because I wasn't wearing a club tracksuit, if I'm being completely honest. That first day when I showed up and I saw everyone around the room, the first thought is, wow, should I really be here? And then the senior tutor on that course, his name was Ted Dale, former Chelsea coach, great coach. I remember him saying to the whole room on the first day, he said 2/3 of you and more are going to fail. He's like, I want to make that very clear. He's like, most of you here aren't even coaching at the right level to be doing this course, and you're probably going to fail. And when he said that to the group, I just felt like he was staring right at me when he said it. He wasn't, but it was just that insecurity, and so it didn't start off on a great point. I was very nervous, felt very much out my depth. But as always, I just thought I'd carry on and see what I could do. But as the weeks went on, and the first couple of weeks, I really started to gain confidence. Obviously, you've got to do a lot of playing on that course. It's 11-a-side, and if you're doing sessions every day for 2 weeks, or 5 days and then another 5 days, obviously people have got to play and everyone's got to put a hand in. So you're playing as well as having to coach as well and learn, and it's very intense, really, really intense. And you've got to go back home and do your homework, because if you just leave it all there at the door on the pitch, you're not going to remember most of the time. But very quickly, I started to gain my confidence as I was delivering sessions back with Kinja and with ASL. I started to kind of feel more confident. Although I still didn't think I belonged on a course, because you've been on coaching courses, right? It's not so much like this on the level 1 and level 2, but the UEFA B really felt like a cliquey kind of course. I mean, at least for the first couple of weeks, all the tracksuits would hang out with each other and talk about their academies and how it's going there. The rest of us are talking about what we're going to have for dinner. But that changed. That did change very quickly, and I made some really good friends in that course. And I think there was a guy called Dom. He was a good player, but great coach. He's at Cambridge right now, doing really well there. A lot of Chelsea coaches on that course, like 8 or 9 Chelsea coaches out of the 45, and I think only 2 of them ended up passing. Kind of made me feel happy that they didn't pass, because on that first day, especially those boys in the Chelsea tracksuits, they were strutting around like they owned the place. They were talking down to other coaches, and they actually weren't that good. They actually weren't that good. When you'd see their practices and when you'd see their assessments, they just weren't good enough anyway. They thought their club crest would award them a certificate, but obviously that's not how it works. You've got to put in the work. You've got to show that you can coach and that you can deliver the sessions and deliver the coaching points. And yeah, it was a really great experience. Like if anyone listening hasn't got to do the UEFA and is thinking about it, whether you think you're ready or not, because I definitely thought I wasn't, just go and do it. Just go and do it, because whether you pass or fail, it doesn't matter. It's what you're going to learn in that course, and it's what you're going to take out of it. And thankfully, I did. I was lucky enough to pass on my first go, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. Like, you just get back on a course, you get to learn more, you get to put in more time. So yeah, don't feel daunted by it. If you're a grassroots coach and you think you need to be at an academy to do a UEFA B or a level 3, don't think that, because you don't. You definitely don't. And the best compliment I got on that course was when I was playing. I was after like the first week of playing, one of the coaches, he was an older fella coaching at some academy down south. I think it was Southend or Southampton, something like that. He was like, yeah, so what team do you play for? I was like, excuse me? I was like, excuse me? He's like, yeah. So who do you play for? I was like, I don't play for anyone. I was like, I play Sunday League sometimes. He's like, oh, I just assumed you had a playing history. I was like, no.
Oh,
But I've held on to that
that's
ever
pretty
since.
cool.
I've got that on my fridge somewhere, just pinned up.
But in all seriousness, you kind of given a quite clear example there of the difficulties, I think, of someone who hasn't worked within the academy system going on to the UEFA B. So what do you, this is an opportunity for you to kind of be honest there. What do you think was the difference between you and those who didn't achieve the qualification first time around? Was it the quality of your sessions, or was it certain things that you did others didn't do? What do you think you were able to do to overcome that obstacle of not being in the academy at that time?
Look, if I'm being completely honest, it's the same thing that Maz told me when I was at Barnet. It's the same things that I learned at Kinja. It's literally what I was told and what I learned. I always have a thing about intensity. Intensity is something I always drum in my sessions, and I always try and keep high. And that's very important at the UEFA B level. You can't be delivering sessions with no intensity. In general, really, as a coach, you should always be delivering sessions with intensity. But it's funny how a lot of people took that for granted, and I don't know if that's nerves or because a lot of people and myself, obviously I don't coach. I wasn't coaching adults at the time, but in the sessions and in your assessment, you're not coaching 15-year-olds, 14-year-olds. You are coaching people who you have been coaching with for the last couple of weeks. You are coaching people that you've spent a lot of time with. So what you need to do, sometimes you need to be smart. So I did the basics. I was organized. I did my session plans. I knew what I was going to deliver. I practiced it in my head. I practiced it with my team. But there's little tips and tricks that I learned. One thing that I think helped me out was I already knew who was good in the group and who wasn't. Like you're kind of scouting while you're playing, to be honest. So if you're, for example, if you're delivering a session on defending in the final third, for your assessment, you need to, or if you're, okay, here's a better one. If you're defending from wide areas, yeah, let's say you're doing a pattern of play defending from wide areas, what you need is someone who can cross a ball, and obviously they've got to be a good winger, but you also need someone who's going to challenge that winger and be a good fullback. So when people were having their assessments, and for example, if someone was delivering defending from wide areas, they'd pick a great left back. They'd pick the best defender and the quickest defender and put him left back in the group. But then they put the worst winger out wide. And then you've got someone who's getting tackled every single possession. And you think it looks great because they're not delivering any crosses. But you can't deliver a session on defending from wide areas if no one's getting the ball to the wide area, or if the person in the wide area can't beat his fullback. And that's just a little thing. Like, obviously in a real life session, you're using the players you have, but when you're on a course and you've got limited resources and you're having to use other coaches, you need to be smart and you need to pick people who are going to suit those positions. Because it's an 11-a-side focus, it's not just about who's on the ball. And in your level 2 and level 1, you might get away with that when you do a technical practice and you put all the good players on one team, or you put one on each team just to kind of balance it out and make your session look good. But in reality, you've got to make sure it's a challenge for both parties, and that's something I did quite well, I think, when I was going to deliver my assessment and mock assessment. I knew, regardless of which coaches were going to be made available to me, in terms of the other people on the course, I knew who'd be playing where and what I'd be using them for. Because the worst thing is when you get someone and you put someone, some coaches do this, and I didn't understand why. They'd randomly just pick players to take part in their session, and I'd be like, I know that guy can't finish, and you're doing an attacking session, and I guess it gives you something to coach, but it can be painful. It can be painful watching other coaches trying to deliver a session when the only thing that's going wrong really is just that the players can't do what he's asking them to do, or they're not getting the challenge they need to be able to deliver the coaching points he wants to deliver.
Very well explained, Saj. Thank you. Difficulty hearing the question originally, but thank you so much for giving a very detailed response. I think that'll help anyone listening either as well. They will aspire to be a better coach and particularly reach that referee license, something like that, and controlling the session a bit better and giving people roles that they're comfortable with. That's really good advice, so thank you for that. So I mean, you've achieved a lot at this point, and I know you're still relatively young. I guess what are the next stages for you then at this point? So you get your A4B license. Are you thinking now, right, let's go to academy and make this my career? Or are you thinking maybe I can do something else in my life? What was your next stage in your plan at that time?
Yeah, so it was an interesting period. So I just got my UEFA-B, and I just started my role at ASL full-time with their athletics department. So I was really set, to be honest. I just graduated. I was good. The first couple years, so for 2 years, I was just, during the football season, I put into practice what I learned. It was brilliant. And I was working at the American School London. And then it got to a point where I thought, okay, 2 years have gone past now. I've had the UEFA-B for 2 years. I think I was 23 at this point. And I thought, okay, I want to kick on. And for me, the ambition always was, I wanted to get to academy level. I wanted to get to a club level and work my way up. That was always my dream. That was always my goal from the very beginning. That's what I wanted to be involved in. And I'm sure that's not too different from most coaches, young coaches at grassroots level. And I had some mixed experiences. So I'm sure people have had similar problems, but just applying for football roles, more often than not, if you see an academy coach position, and you see it online, or in my experience, it's usually given to the person who's mates with the academy manager, or it's someone they know. It's usually who you know and not what you know, unfortunately, in football. And one time I got I won't say who, but I got a response from this football club, who had a decent academy. And they asked me to come interview. So they wanted me to deliver a session and then spend some time with the head of the academy at the time, on a face-to-face interview. So we went back and forth on email a couple of times. I sent them my session plan. I was ready to deliver. I went over. I delivered the session. I thought it went really well. And I was walking back with the academy manager, and a few of his other coaches. We were walking back to a lobby area where we could watch a bit of football. I think it was a Champions League day and Real Madrid were playing, so they were just about to kick off. We were walking back, and he was giving me feedback on my session. He said I'd done well, blah blah blah. We sat down and they asked me to watch the game with them, the head of the academy and a few of the other academy coaches. And I said okay, but there were also some people interviewing. As we were watching that game, there were some people on the pitches interviewing and doing their sessions, and he wasn't watching, the academy manager, which was funny. But I asked the other academy coaches who were watching the game with me, so what are they like? What are those coaches like, who who are delivering their sessions right now. And what I meant was, like, what are their backgrounds like? Are they grassroots? Have they coached before? Like those kind of things. I literally meant it from a coaching perspective. And then one of them, he didn't. I remember this very clearly. He didn't even move. He kept staring at the game, watching the screen, and he said, "Well, one of them looks like a terrorist, and the other looks like a criminal." And a few of the academy coaches laughed, but none of them batted an eye. They just kept watching the game. And I had seen those coaches on the field prior to coming in, and one of them was an Asian guy with a large beard, and the other one was a black guy, and that just didn't sit well with me. And I'm almost embarrassed to tell this story because I really should have spoken up and I really should have said something. But I was the most junior in the room. I was obviously interviewing for a role and I just felt really uncomfortable. So I had to fake a phone call and I told the head of academy that I had to go. They sent me an email offering me the position a couple of days later and I rejected it. But that left a really sour taste in my mouth. And I had seen discrimination in football before, and I had seen similar things I've heard similar things said on like a coaching course. But it's very different when you're applying for a role. And I've sort of looked at this role as, okay, here we go. We can finally get a foot in the academy. I can give it a real go, and this is an opportunity. And it's a club who I admired a lot and thought a lot more highly of, and the academy manager as well. I was very shocked he never spoke up and reprimanded those coaches, because he was a friend of a friend, and he was a very experienced coach, high level coach, still is. And I was very, very surprised to see that happen, and it just left a really bad taste in my mouth. And I didn't go back to that club. I didn't reply to the email. And for a while, I didn't apply for any other roles. I had I think I've showed you this before. I've got a whole email folder full of rejections from academy roles and roles like that. But that particular experience just left a really, really sour taste in my mouth. And yeah, it just made me think a bit harder.
Thank you, Risa. I can imagine it's not comfortable talking about that publicly, but I think it's helpful to be honest, of course. And I mentioned the fact that these issues do happen within football, particularly at academy level. And it's obviously a real shame that something like that put you off the idea of applying for a role that you're looking forward to. But I think it's also very brave to make that decision and stand as well and say, no, it's not really the club for me. So did you then feel after that experience that maybe you weren't going to be the right fit for academy? That's one example. Or did you then apply elsewhere? I mean, you mentioned the rejections, but were you successful at any other clubs that you applied for, or did you just get a break from it at that point?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I wasn't successful, and it came to a point, even in my personal life, like since the age of 16, I was like all guns blazing with coaching. Like even with uni, I didn't really focus on uni too much. For the first 2 years, I was barely there. I would always be coaching somewhere, and I was always putting in the hours. And then it got to a point where, to be honest, and that experience as well, it just kind of made me feel a bit of burnout. And that's the time when I left Kinja. I think I'd done about up to 5 years there, just under 5 years at Kinja. No, over, yeah, at Kinja. And it was becoming a struggle for me to balance a full-time job, coaching at Kinja and coaching at ASL. It just got to a point where I had to take a break, which is what I did. And then my next experience is completely different from anything else that I've done. In that time, I moved on to, well, actually, before I move on to that, I did spend some time with a college development program. So I mentioned a coach called Carlos. Carlos was still with ASL, the American School in London, and he was head coach of the first team after Akai left and Jay left, and it was myself and some other coaches. And Carlos made a program for those American boys from the American school who wanted to go and get signed at college level. Made a program for them in the off season, because the ASL season would only run from August till November. So for the rest of the year, they weren't playing football with their school. So he made a program for them. I got involved in that, and that was excellent. And this was like very different from what I'd done before, because I wasn't coaching a team to win football games. I mean, we did play friendlies and we did play football matches, but this was very much player development, and this was very much preparing each player for their workouts and trials for when they go to Dallas. There was a tournament in Dallas every summer, and that's what we were preparing them for. But obviously they were playing as a team, but knowing these boys, the emphasis was primarily on personal development, and then we do team aspects too. But that's one thing I learned from Carlos, and I had not had this from any other coach. Carlos was he's a very tough coach with the players, but he's very much about intensity. And when I talk about I think I've mentioned it quite a few times, but when I talk about intensity, I mean like a whole nother level. Like, so Carlos is from like a fitness and performance background. He worked with tennis athletes. He worked with in athletics and football. But he's very, very good and very, very knowledgeable in how to develop players in terms of strength and conditioning. So it was an interesting point, because I'd always worked with youth players where we were working on technique and tactics, but these boys, mostly 15, 16, 17, a lot of them were already amazing technically and pretty good tactically. So it was about developing them physically, because when they would go to these tournaments in Dallas, and like what American sports is like, they always just want the strongest and the fastest. But our boys were very technical, so it became about helping them develop from a physical point of view and building strength and conditioning them. And the exercises I learned, the drills I learned, the way he always had a football involved. None of these exercises were completely unrelated to football. He'd always get a football involved, and it'd almost be training them physically as well as technically, because some of the drills he'd done were just brilliant. And I had never seen this side of coaching before. I'd always been involved at the younger stage or the youth level, as I mentioned, technical, tactical, and even on your coaching courses, you don't really go much into the actual physical performance side of things and conditioning side of things. It's mentioned, but you don't really learn too much about it. So Carlos gave me a great opportunity to see that side of things and get involved in that side of things. And even me personally, I became more fit from just doing those sessions with the boys. So delivering those sessions, another thing I learned from Carlos, he would do his demonstrations at the exact same, if not higher intensity than he expected from the players. And he'd demonstrate at least 2 or 3 times. So that it's a consistent intensity. And that's something I learned as a coach. And as a coach, you always think the player's got to do it. The player's got to do it. And you sometimes forget about your own the way the players look at you. And I could see that in the way that he just did the demonstrations and the way that he set the tone just from showing them what to do. As soon as you get them going, there was none of that, all right, stopping them 5 minutes in and going, okay, we need a high intensity. There was none of that, because Carlos already said it. He already set it out by doing it and doing it at a much higher intensity than they could or would. So he proved it to them, and then he asked them to show him. And as a coach, for me, sometimes you get that in sessions where you might be a bit lazy and the demos you do might not be at a high intensity because you're just trying to show them. But it reiterated the point to me how important that is for the players to see how it should be done and what level it should be done before they can do it themselves. And yeah, there wasn't many months there. I think about 4 or 5, but it was a great learning experience, because I learned the whole side of the game that I didn't know too much about.
Always learning, and obviously sports science is such a key part now of football. It's something that we're a lot more aware of now. So getting a chance to see it firsthand must have been really helpful for you as a coach. You said you got to yourself from it. But on top of that, you also learned a few areas which hadn't been given. Even though your example, someone's come through the system correctly, level 1, level 2, your way through B. But even now, you're still learning little bits on top of that, like the conditioning and the fitness work. That's brilliant. So you mentioned you were there for a couple of months. I know you go abroad at some point, don't you? So is there a long transition between you finishing this 4-month period of time with Carlos, you then going abroad and coaching abroad?
Yeah, well, I mean, there was it was about a year break I took out, so I left ASL completely. I moved out of London, and I wasn't even coaching for a whole about year. And then I applied for a role with Cardiff City. I saw a position for international development coach. They needed level 2 and level 3 coaches for that. And I'd always thought about coaching abroad. This is something I've always dreamed of. I had always wanted to do, but I never took the step. And Cardiff responded to me pretty quickly, actually, within a week, and offered me an interview and a session. And I was so shocked. First of all, because I'm used to getting the rejection replies. I've got so many of those, and I hadn't really given it a proper thought because I I just didn't think I'd be offered it. So, and this was again another really weird thing. Like 2 days before that interview, Maz, the guy I mentioned from Barnet, I hadn't
Yeah.
spoken to him since my time at Barnet, so it was probably about 5 or 6 years later. He got in touch with me via LinkedIn, and we got talking. And he was running a project in Saudi Arabia, and he needed coaches. And he asked me if I was something I'd be interested in. So all of a sudden, there was an option to go Beijing, China, or Saudi Arabia. And I was really, really contemplating both. I remember because the first Champions League final that we lost against Madrid, I remember I was telling you about those. And
Yeah.
yeah, and eventually I did take that position. I accepted that role with Cardiff.
Was there a particular reason why you chose the Cardiff? I mean, I know the reason why, but for people listening, please. Was there a particular reason why you chose the role in Beijing and the Cardiff over the opportunity to work with Maz again in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, alcohol. Yeah, pretty much. No, well, I mean that was I mean, obviously Saudi Arabia has very strict rules for certain things, so that was always playing in my head. But I wasn't successful with the Saudi Arabia role in the end anyway. I did accept the Cardiff role before that, but
Okay.
I wasn't successful in the end anyway. But I was gonna go with Cardiff anyway because Beijing felt like a city with a bit more freedom.
Okay. Brief touch on your time in Cardiff. I'm not sure many people listening have had a chance to coach abroad. Maybe they've done several camps around the country and not abroad. Well, give us a brief overview because I know unfortunately it wasn't as long as you'd like it to be, but what was your time like as a coach in China? What was the differences? What was the experience like for you as a foreigner, I guess? Talk to us about that a bit, please.
It was completely different to anything I've ever done for obvious reasons. I mean, the language, first of all, they didn't speak the language, but what I wasn't ready for, and I just didn't really imagine, was how bad they are at football. I mean,
Oh, okay.
there's obviously a few good players, and there were some good players that we saw out there and got to work with. Um, but generally, in China, basketball has been their sport for the last 30 years. It's not till their new leader, I can't remember his name, but the guy currently in charge came in some time ago, that he made football a part of the national curriculum. So I think China's got a goal to win the World Cup by 2050. Yeah, just a bit ambitious. And obviously they're very dedicated to their goals. They put football in every single part of the national curriculum. So football became a school lesson. So there were sometimes players who we were coaching that didn't want to be there, that were just doing it because it was a lesson. And there, some of them just couldn't run in a straight line without falling over. It sounds really stupid and it sounds really funny, but because their PE and their physical education is nothing like what we experience in England. So it's very like much like the military. I don't know if you're listening and you're interested, go on YouTube and type in China or Beijing PE lessons, and you'll see what they kind of do. And it's like the military. They just march, they skip, and they sprint. And there's not much else to it. There's no change of directions. There's no tag. There's not much mechanics to it. So like when I would get with some players when I was delivering the school sessions, they'd get a ball, try and go around a cone and just fall over. And there'd be so many kids like that. And it was a completely different kind of coaching, because I had come from a level where that was a given. You like anyone can go around a cone.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and I came to a point where I'm trying to coach mechanics, and I'm not gonna lie. Initially, I was a bit annoyed by that. I mean, I was like, well, I want to work with better players. This is not what I'm here to do. But I mean, obviously, I was there for the challenge, and I knew I was going out to a country where football wasn't the main sport. So for me as a coach, it was about, this is something I didn't get taught. You don't get taught on the level one how to teach someone how to go around a cone. You don't get taught how to teach someone how to go around a corner without falling over. This is like basic mechanics. So for me, it just became a project, and I thought, all right, what I'll try and do is just develop these guys physically and teach them the sport of football. Because, for example, some of them didn't even know if the ball went behind the goal, it was a goal kick. They just kept playing. Some of them didn't know what throwing was, and I can't speak English. I can't speak to them in English, so I'm having to learn these words in Mandarin, and then in our classroom lessons, I'm trying to teach them the rules of football. So I was trying to teach formations. I was trying to teach them what a football pitch looks like, what the box is for, what a throw-in is. And these are all things that are a given to any kid in the UK that I've never had to discuss or coach ever before. But I've almost had to go back to the very, very beginning, like teach the sport. And it was a very humbling experience because, like I said, initially I was like, wait, I'm way too good for this. But then I started to see the challenge in it, and I was like, well, hold on, if I really want to prove my worth as a coach, I've got to be able to teach them anything. So even if it's as simple as going around a corner, I've got to try and teach them how to do things. So a lot of it became about functional movement and trying to get them to play games and sort of games where they're forced to change direction, and trying to teach them some agility and some speed, because yeah, it's not a very athletic place, Beijing.
okay, that's really enlightening, because yeah, it's almost like you're talking to children, I guess, who've never ever seen football before, which is the case. You teach them everything, not just kicking the ball, to what it means for a corner, for a throw in, for a goal kick, or what a foul is. Every single element of the rules, which, like you said, you get exposed to in Western countries from a young age, from about 5 or 6. These children hadn't seen that before. So yeah, it must be quite humbling, as you said at the time. Before I go any
Yeah,
further,
exactly.
so before I go any further, I've got a couple of questions. But I know Danny, who's helping me to record the podcast today, has got a few questions for you. So I want to let Dave really come in and ask his questions before I carry on. So over to you, Danny.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Rob. Hi, Saj, you okay?
I'm good, Danny. I'm good. Yourself?
Yeah, good, thank you. I feel like I'm on some kind of phone line, or on a radio station calling in. So Saj, yeah, really, really enjoyed sort of listening to this so far, and finding out some stuff that, unfortunately we didn't really get to cross paths too often. We never really got the chance to coach together, which is a shame. You mentioned about the UEFA B course. Now, I know obviously they're really hard to get on nowadays, but if someone listening in was interested in pursuing a UEFA B course, what would you say is a bit of advice that you would give to them before going on to that course?
Well, I'd first of all say make sure you've done your youth modules, because there's quite a bit of crossover. Not exactly maybe module 3, but module 1 and 2. There's a bit of crossover, and there's a lot of good stuff you can learn before you get into the UEFA B, and that's something that you actually told me and helped me out as well. But from a practical point of view, if you're a grassroots coach, like I was going on to that course, just make sure, like, it's imperative, because this did mess me up. Although I did pass in the end, and I did quite well, I did struggle at points for my mock assessments. So the UEFA B is all about the 11-a-side game, right? It's all about phases of play and the different aspects of an 11-a-side game tactically, as well as technically. And there's a real struggle. You're meant to deliver a 45-minute to an hour session, I think, for your assessment. And there's a real tough balance between delivering your technical points and your tactical points and speaking to the group, as well as letting the ball play and letting the ball roll. And I can't stress how much enough you need to let them play. You need to let them play. And what I was speaking about earlier in terms of picking the players for positions, you need to be smart and you need to have seen those scenarios before in order to be able to coach them. So if you don't have an 11-a-side team that you're coaching on a regular basis, or even an 11-a-side team that you trust, it might not necessarily have to be yours, but if there's, for example, an 115 teams of your mates that you know really well, that you might not necessarily coach week in, week out, but you know the players, you know the coach, you need to be able to work with a team and put those hours in, because you have to have seen that pattern of play 5 or 6 times, really, before you can confidently preempt it and confidently deliver it in a session. And that's what it's about. It's about starting to understand the different areas of the game and the different things that would be needed to coach an individual as well as a unit.
Brilliant. And just going back to something that you mentioned earlier to do with the UEFA B course, you mentioned about, you would feel a little bit insecure in terms of you looking around, everyone's got the tracksuits on at certain clubs. How did you overcome that? How can someone overcome that sort of insecurity as a coach?
Yeah, it's really tough. It's really tough because, like I said, my ambition was always to be that academy coach, right? To be in that club tracksuit and to show it off. And I think there is an obsession with young coaches to get to that level, or to think that that even is a level, because it's not. And I'll make that very clear, at least in my experience with the coaches I've worked with. Just because you wear a club tracksuit does not mean you're better than a coach at grassroots level. No way, like never. The tracksuit's got nothing to do with it. That's just because of who you know, or that's just because you were fortunate to be in a certain area. The way I was able to overcome that insecurity was, to be honest, to just show up. I just showed up. I was lucky enough to have people like Akai who had done that course before and given me a bit of advice in terms of how to manage those insecurities and those anxieties you might feel about being out of place. And in a way, because Jay told me I was going to fail. So I already had this thought in my head that I wasn't going to pass anyway. And I think you kind of need that humility. You need to go into that course thinking, I am not good enough, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to learn. I'm going to listen to everything that gets taught. I'm going to put it into practice, and I'm going to do every single thing I possibly can to help myself pass. And that's literally what I did. I was, even to the day of my assessment, I was still nervous, and I was still a bit insecure, not by my ability, but just about how good the other coaches is. But to be honest, if you are a decent coach and you do reflect on your practices, you do put effort into your organization, and you do try and learn, you will be fine. You will be fine. You will see within the first 2 or 3 weeks who the good coaches are and who the not so good coaches are. And at least on my course, you start to see who's taking it seriously and who's not. And if you're a coach who's ambitious and you really want to learn and you're eager to learn, and you go in with the thought of, forget about passing or failing, I'm just here to learn and do as best as I possibly can, you will be fine. You will be fine. I think that's the best way to go into it.
Okay, I mean, I think Dave might come back in at another point. I'll probably check on him. But I've got a couple of questions we'll ask you, Saj, before we finish, please.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I'm aware that after your experience in China, and it's very interesting for you to take time out to speak to us about that, you're taking a bit of a break from coaching. That's correct, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'll ask you is, at this moment of time, what do you see yourself doing in the future? Are you likely to come back to coaching? Or would you like to come back? Do you miss it?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, just going back through this journey has got me itching again. Unfortunately, I'm just I don't live in London anymore. But I definitely do want to get back into coaching. The job I do now, Monday to Friday, full time, is quite taxing. So it would be difficult to find the time. But definitely within the next 5 years, I do want to get back involved in coaching at whatever level it is. I'm not too fussed. I really do miss it, and there's so many good things that come out of coaching. And like I said, one of my favorite things is watching a team develop. So I really do miss that part of it.
Okay, so there's hope. There is hope that you may come back in, but obviously it's going to be a role that's suitable, right, for you.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely will come back. It's just literally me having to stabilize my life, which is a challenge in itself.
For all of us, I appreciate that. Okay, so coming towards the end now of the podcast, and I've really enjoyed it so far, and I hope you've enjoyed the experience too, Saj. It's been really good to cover so much, and I honestly wish we had like a couple of hours go through this. Maybe we'll do a part 2 and have a point. But I just want to kind of finish off now after a couple of more questions, a little bit of self-reflection if you can. I think it was helpful to listening coaches, or anyone really listening in, to go look back at how they were as a younger person and how they are now. Is there any advice you would give to a young Saj starting off his coaching career at 16 that you think would be helpful for him?
No. I mean, the reason I say that is because I made plenty of mistakes, like loads and loads of mistakes. But that's what it's about. I mean, I definitely do. I tell my players all the time, it's not about executing it perfectly every time. You just need to get good at doing it. Repetition is the key. Putting hours into the work, and then you'll see the results. And thankfully, I had an opportunity to do that from a young age. I was coaching about 8 hours a week for years. So only advice would be maybe not to Saj, a young Saj, but to anyone starting at a young level, don't put any pressure on yourself. Just go in with an open mind and just put in the hours. If half the job is just showing up, if you can show up. I was never a great coach when I was young. I was never very confident. I was never very loud. I never intervened. My demonstrations were poor. My organization was okay. But what I did was I'd always show up to watch another coach. I'd always stay back after my session to watch another coach or speak. I'd always take on feedback. So if you're willing to learn and if you're willing to make mistakes, you will be completely fine, because that's what we ask our players to do.
Exactly. Excellent. And to finish off on a positive note, what's brought you the most joy as a youth football coach?
Oh, that's a tough one. There's so many enjoyable aspects of coaching. I mean, I love watching, as I mentioned earlier, I love watching a team develop. I love watching them grow as people as well as players. But if I'm honest, when I look back on the whole coaching career, I mean, I've been lucky because quite a few of my boys from the ASL years, I think at least 6 or 7, have gone on to play Division 1 college football, soccer. With scholarships, a lot have gone, and a few have gone into academies. Like I've been able to coach some great players, but still to this day, my biggest and favorite memory is of a player I had who, when he joined as a small under 11, he was very shy, like really shy. I'll say his name, Sedan. Sedan was really shy, and he wasn't very loud, and he wasn't very loud with his football skills either. So we didn't really know he had them. I'm sure they were always there, but he would always be one to just receive and pass. He wouldn't show any flair. But watching him develop over his 3 years that I had him, from a young shy boy who would barely speak to anyone to captain of the team under you, I think, who was a leader in the team and someone who would welcome in new boys and introduce them to the group. And I remember getting an email from his mum about how well he started to do at school after joining Kinja and making new friends. And that was the best, because just hearing how someone developed as a person, forget the football skills, just seeing how he developed and how he became a leader and how he grew as a man was really cool. And there's plenty of experiences like him, boys like Kamal, Java, you've all worked with, who have been an absolute pleasure, and similar sort of personalities. That's where my passion for it comes, if I'm being honest. Just having that satisfaction that they will be good people, or I've had a bit of a hand in helping them become good people.
Yeah. I mean, all three you mentioned there, Zidane, Java, and Kamal, excellent examples of young role models who came to the club just as kids, as everyone does, want to play football, but became real good young adults who took responsibility within the team and led by example, and became good human beings. So yeah, well said, Saj. Thank you for mentioning that.
No, brilliant. No, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Okay, so that is it then, folks. That brings us to the end of today's podcast. Saj, how can anyone listening follow you on social media?
Oh wow. I don't know if anyone does want to do that. But I'll be honest, I don't remember my socials. I think my Instagram is _Saj_7. Nothing football related really, unless Liverpool win. But I just like to say how much of an honor it's been to be on this podcast. Rob, obviously you, great friend of mine and a great coach as well, who's seen most of my journey. I'm really glad it was you that interviewed me. And Danny, thank you very much for having me on. I think this podcast is a great tool for young coaches, and I wish I had something like this growing up, because it would have been cool to hear all these great coaches' experiences. And I'm sure you guys will be affecting a lot of people, a lot of young coaches with this content. So it's great to see. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you, Simon. Thank you for having us on. We'll attempt to add your Twitter handle somewhere along this. I'm sure Danny will help you out there if you want to follow you. But yeah, it's always great to talk to someone who has so much experience within the game and has so much to give back, which I know you kindly do. So thanks so much for doing that today, and be honest as well, because we've done some topics which are sensitive topics, quite emotional ones, but you've been open and honest enough for us to learn about that and hear that. So thank you. So from our point of view,
You're welcome. Thanks for having
me. You're welcome, Saj. You also follow Halftime Cuppa on Twitter. I do remember our handle, which is at halftime_cuppa. And if you want to follow me, I don't know why, but I do put some stuff on Instagram and Twitter. My Twitter is at Bobby Man, so it's BOBBYMANZ. As mentioned at the start of the podcast, all of our shows are now available via our website, which is halftimecuppa.com, or by searching Halftime Cuppa on iTunes or Spotify. So thanks again to Saj for his time. Thank you, Danny, for your questions.
What would you say is your sort of achievement, your biggest achievement? I feel like you kind of addressed that in terms of the player development, seeing them become better people.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know if you had a standout highlight that really sort of sprung to mind, but that was all I had down.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, that would probably be my best achievement. If we're talking about on the pitch, it was years ago in that first season with the under-14 girls team. We were playing Tottenham in the County Cup final, and Tottenham ladies showed up. They had never heard of us. They didn't even do a proper warm-up. Their coach didn't even come and shake our hands or do the player cards. He sent one of his players to do it. They weren't taking us seriously at all, and then we ended up beating them 3-2 and winning the cup. And so that was probably my favourite. I love getting in on a club tracksuit. I love giving.
Yeah. That seems to be a pattern here. You put a tracksuit, come with big heads, and
Saj, the club tracksuit killer.
I defend grassroots always.
Yeah, exactly. Grassroots for life. I love it, sir. Thank you, Saj. Thank you, Danny. I guess until next time, folks. Take care, stay safe, and goodbye.